Actually, this topic has a kind of a long scholarly trajectory in Southeast Asia, which I mean, the overview, we will talk about how um, punk music and punk literature exist within the context of illiberal and authoritarian regime in not just Singapore, but a good part of the region in which the city-state is being located within. And I think Zhang would also be mapping out on the cultural significance of Chris Ho's artistic journey as part of how alternative music also integrates with the mainstream, and how it negotiate with hegemonic structures within local specific conditions. So Zhang, can we go to the next slide? Um, yeah. So as I actually mentioned, punk music or alternative music in Southeast Asia has actually quite a special place in the scholarly literature. Um, it has been written since about probably since the 1990s, in mainstream with like people like Trick Lockhart, talking about punk in Indonesia. And the literature, the scholarly literature continues today, even as late as 2021 and 2022. Why is that so? I mean, particularly when in European and American countries like or Western countries, like punk is something like now a heritage in some ways, empty signifier, aging punks to a bygone culture. But I think in Southeast Asia, it still has a lot of currency, especially what I've framed here as the urban cultural resistance to a cocktail, literally a big cocktail mixture of like neoliberal economic exploitation and gentrification, authoritarian politics blended in together with like ethno-religious fundamentalism. So, years ago, in the autonomously run region of Aceh, Indonesia, like punks were identified and prosecuted by the Islamic local authorities under very specific Sharia law. So this kind of tensions still exists in some ways, and the next point would link to this resistance is also the formations of different forms of DIY narrative. So DIY, do it yourself, is still the very much like touted kind of alternate discourse to radio friendly mainstream, and to that even of digital media. So this kind of resistance has been there since the 1980s, 1990s in wherever punk scenes established themselves in the region. And then we have very close knitted communities that have formed over the years, in fact decades, which has been also part of my scholarly literature as well. um, Not just in Singapore, Malaysia, but parts of Southeast Asia. So punk rock has a long history since like the 1980s. Um, the politics may still be the same, So interestingly, the politics of nostalgia doesn't really work for that. And before I go into the next slide, yes, the everyday negotiations with hegemony. You cannot be raising your third finger all the time, without suffering very much like severe consequences. There are kind of daily living kind of politics that punk rock community have to be involved in. So yeah, this is one of the pictures that I've collected from someone about punk rockers, in the 1990s in Singapore, like lounging around outside then Sogo departmental store that is no longer exists in Singapore. Yeah, so we move on to the next slide. Thanks, Zhang. So the icon Chris Ho, born in 1954, and just I think he passed away very suddenly, within a few months of having cancer. But his life, I kind of put it along with the chronology of Singapore's history, contemporary history since the People's Action Party government took over in 1960 and has always been there till today. So if you can see the timeline, it has a lot to do with the history of of cultural intervention. You call it censorship, you call it restrictions. It's part of framing state discourses on modernity and the fear of what they consider as Western influence. So, males having short hair, you have that in South Korea too in the 60s and 70s. The kind of breakneck development, the kind of creating disciplined societies that Western hippie cultures are not encouraged, and subsequently the kind of bogey were turned into that of punk culture. So this is a country that even like slam dancing was banned in the 1990s, and not surprising, mainstream media is heavily controlled by the state. So you have this like relaxations, with that of restrictions in the 90s. Cities aspire to be global. Cities aspire to be creative. And I think like many cities in Asia, they want the cake and they want to eat it. They want to be seen to be hip, creative, cutting edge, but they want the kind of social controls there. So the Singapore state has been cleverly, in fact, negotiating these boundaries, and such negotiations are also being emulated in other countries with similar political cultures. And then, the kind of restrictions, repressions continue even till today on social media, on different generation of artists. But so Chris Ho has seen it all. He was actually the first person, in Singapore, perhaps I can say, who wrote about alternative music as an academic subject in his honours thesis in 1979. And after that, Tzang will elaborate on how he was involved in different areas of the arts as part of this panel on crossings of boundaries, and how he actually moved along with the chronology of Singapore's cultural history. So I'll leave it to Tzang to talk about the subsequent parts here. So Tzang, over to you.
All right, this is wonderful. All right, so who is Chris Ho, aka X Ho? It really depends on who you ask in Singapore, right? Right on the surface, everybody calls him Chris Ho, the journalist, the club DJ, the radio personality, the veteran, the music critic. But as introductions, they often add that he's also an underground musician, a songwriter, a person with a rebel streak, an alternative music icon. But few people actually talk about the art itself. Who is Chris Ho as an artist? He wrote books, he made films, and he made music. So where is the gap? When Chris Ho passed away due to stomach cancer on the 27th of September, a lot of tributes came pouring in, talking about how the person that he is and the multiple sides and the contributions to radio. But as of today, there's still not enough discussion about what Chris Ho and X Ho, the artist, is trying to express with his work and through his work. So our research is actually trying to focus on the lesser known aspects of his more transgressive underground work. They are also mainly self-funded. So we are looking for this research, we are looking into his music, his films, his books, and also his interviews. Why? Because it's a shame if people in Singapore or anywhere else only remember him only for his friendly, identifiable, questionable side, and forget about the breakthroughs and transgressions that he had put forth so that he could say things in his work. There's a lot of value in his artistic expression that I believe can contribute a lot to opening up Singapore that he wants to open. So Chris Ho and Chris Ho, X Ho and X Ho. This is what he calls himself in his own website called chrishosucks.com, xhosucks.com. He calls himself a harsh rebel in a harsh fascist state. So how do you punk in a country like Singapore, known so much for it being a garden city? He did it with his music, and these are the list of albums that he has, and his first album coming out all the way in 79, 80, as a solo act, as well as when he was he rechristened himself as X, Chris Ho with an X. He also has his books, right? He started publishing books in the 90s, starting with Kill Me Rebel Mare, and along his books are often, you can call it hate letters to Singapore. when a lot of people who know about Chris Ho knows about him and his music and his contributions to journalism and writing, but few people, even his best friends, people who are close to him, do not know that he himself is an experimental filmmaker. When I interviewed him in the 90s, he did tell me that he wrote books so that he could, because books are cheaper than making films. But in the 2000s, he started making films, sometimes independently, and you can even call it secretly on very, very low budgets. So his films were actually screened. I was nominated as the best shot in the Porn Festival in Berlin. It was screened in the Rotterdam Film Festival. And we hear of Chris Ho also in the films that he appeared in other people's films. For example, the film of Khuin, where Chris Ho was famously filmed having his dick tattooed. All right. So, how did Chris Ho do Chris Ho in a country like Singapore? I think you have to do it. He did it with a lot of by positioning different personas, right? The positioning of different personas. The Chris Ho, the DJ, as well as X Ho, the transgressive act. Maybe I'll allow a fellow DJ in Singapore to talk about this. I hope you can hear it. Let me play this video.
Oh wait, Tzang, I think I forgot to do the share sound. Oh dear.
Okay. Okay.
So never mind. I think you just go on because of the interest of time.
Sure, I understand. So over here, I think maybe I'll just very, very quickly show you. It's essentially a mainstream. He appeared on the mainstream TV show, giving a tribute about Chris Ho.
Okay, sorry, Tzang. Maybe you try in your slide, PowerPoint slide, to put share slide on share sound on your Zoom share screen.
And maybe I'll try that.
You forget that's something that we always forget.
Okay, let me try this again.
Honestly,
yes.
I was surprised only because, it's kind of a radio station that is for the family. We play classic hits, and it's a very easy listening station. And I don't think you would describe Chris Ho as easy listening. You would think, punk, indie, alternative rock, screaming with anger, anarchy. And of course, here's also the other persona, which was as a club DJ. And Chris, very interestingly, was very okay about, it's all right, then I'll just start a different social media platform, and that will be for my gold fans. And so he just fit right in seamlessly. He just slid into his role on the evening drive time.
If you thought that a guy who's covered head to toe in tattoos of various kinds, and in fact you could basically read his musical choices because he wore them like a badge of honor, how are we going to convince our listeners that Chris Ho can make a decent case of Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton? Is it believable?
Tzang, we couldn't hear you. Tzang, we couldn't. Yeah, Tzang, we cannot hear you. I think Tzang, you got to unmute yourself.
Testing audio.
Yeah, good.
Okay, all right. I think yes. Okay, so there is this Chris Ho, the second persona of Chris Ho, which is where he labels himself X Ho. This is where you see the swastikas. You see the inverted crucifix that sometimes brandish on his head. The 666 he often used the Nazi and satanic symbolism almost as if he's trying to poke us, push us. First, you accept me for this nice, fuzzy guy. Next moment, I'm giving you all of these very, very transgressive, very, very subversive aspects of myself, my character, my persona. And as X-Ho, Chris Ho is unflinching, uncensored. In his book, he wrote about how he realized he was born in a still repressed country for a reason to discover his own reactionary creative voice. So what we notice is that X-Ho is more than just a moniker. It's almost like a call sign. He calls himself, I'm here with an X, Chris Ho with an X. And this is where you see this tongue-in-cheek, devilish persona. There's this author called Thomas Frank, and he describes Chris Ho as a person that is very hard to understand because if you see him, he's a man who prefers to work through sarcasm, ridicule, irony, and actually double-speak. So the Chris Ho that he plays with X-Ho, when you start looking at his work, he gets a little bit uncomfortable. How do you reconcile with this very public figure called Chris Ho, the radio DJ? And what is the Chris Ho message? What's he trying to say? I need to play this clip by this director called Khuin. It's a documentary about Chris Ho. I really hope it can play with audio. Let me just try now.
You repress the people.
Got audio?
Yep.
You subjugate them. How do you expect them to be nice to other people? You repress the people. You subjugate them. How do you expect them to be nice to other people? The solution. And then they shut you up after that, you know? And that really used to be the way. Until now, of course, with the internet, they can't quite shut you up no more. They want to shut you up with the last say in the Straits Times national paper. But after that, people go on the internet and talk about it. So, end of their shutting that. But it just used to be like that for years and years. How many? At least 4 decades? They have the last say. Shut up. Your opinion don't matter no more. End of story. We decide. Authoritarian. When are Singaporeans going to wake up to the fact that authoritarian is a synonym for totalitarian? Any form of power is fascinating and awesome. That's why I read all those books about Nazism, is to understand the whole philosophy, culture of why Nazism came about. You cannot deny that swastika is a powerful symbol, but at the same time it's a very powerful emblem that the young people still look up to. It's almost godlike in its evilness, and I think there is that fascination with that element. And maybe it's also very rock and roll. I don't deny the power of LKY. He's done a lot. It's all terribly wrong. Terribly wrong. Because it kills the human spirit. That's what is awful about it. I mean, for whatever reason, you can have your excuses like, oh, it's for the survival of the country, it's pragmatic. Yeah, but you don't kill the spirit of people. The joy of living, the joy of life. There is no sense of that in an average Joe Singaporean because he believes that he's completely trapped by the system. He's in the mercy of the system. And that's a terrible place to be. That's something that, to me, I would consider it evil.
All right, and so you can see Chris Ho is has a very sensitive side. All right, in this song written by Dick Liew in Singapore, it's written as a love song, but the way Chris Ho frames it, it becomes a song that's almost about the relationship with power in Singapore. I'm just going to be playing a clip.
He nodded courteously and knew who I was, though I didn't know who he was till I realized you were standing next to me. Not smiling, not saying a word, I retreated for my own protection, shying from the scene.
You can see that here how he very cleverly takes the lyrics of a love song, but in his voice and in his own way of delivery turns it into a song about his awkward relationship with authority. All right, so let's talk about more about him and where he's why he's trying to say with his work. In the words of Chris Ho, in the song, in the collaboration in Let's Know, he talks about how as Singaporeans, we're always halfway there. And maybe that's why he's turning to these elements of extremes in order to kind of push, right? So Chris Ho has often said that he's not part of any scene or any group. It's very easy to call him a misfit. I'm just going to go on a little bit faster so that you can understand how he himself is not, he does not get away with trouble as well. He got into a lot of problems as well in the 2010s and the 2020s. When he started posting on social media and he incurred the wrath of people. But let's answer this question. What makes Chris Ho so punk? All right, I think why he is so punk in Singapore is his ability to still offend so many people and also get away with it. For one thing, he has this multiple disciplines and multiple personas, and both sides know the other side, and both sides have a way of are scratching their heads trying to make sense of him. And here he often, regardless of whatever scene he seems to represent, be it the punk or the metal people, he'll go a little bit further than what is comfortable for people. When I was in 2009 and I was making this film called Fairyville, I'm a filmmaker by the way, Chris learns that I'm making a film with a controversial subject. It's a film about teenagers in schools who are bullied and they're self-radicalized and they start bringing guns and they started making bombs in school. Knowing that I'm making a film with a controversial subject, he says, Tzang, if you want to be an artist rebel, I have something to tell you that it's important in Singapore not to ever get caught. Do not play the whole baiting game of let's bait the authorities, let's seek authority, and let's get arrested. It's easy to do things like this. It's easy to do things and get arrested. It's easy to seek controversy, but in Singapore, it's a game that doesn't fly. In fact, it's harder to never get caught and for them to have nothing on you. So that's how you punk in Singapore, in the words of Chris Ho. Never get caught because not authority.
Tzang, sorry, I think we have to end it here. Just have 3 minutes for questions before we go to the next speaker.
Sure,
so
I understand that.
So I'm sorry for cutting my own session here. So are there any questions or comments here for Tzang and myself? Anyone that'd like to add on with any questions here? Okay, I just want to state something that maybe, in Singapore, we kind of take it for granted, but you notice that everything is in the English language because it's the only country in Asia that the lingua franca or the main language spoken is English. It's the language of commerce and arts, and increasingly, like the Caribbean countries like Jamaica is like the kind of like national language that the household language as well. So anything that you would like to ask or any thoughts and reflections here? I'm just wondering, but yeah, hi, Dongjin.
I'm sorry that I feel like I'm quite hesitant to ask questions because I felt like I'm not really familiar with not many popular genres, and then also I learned about Chris Ho today, and then I was very fascinated by his various attempts, and then I was curious, is there any other musician who is like him in Singapore, or was there any influential figure for him to create his own kind of identity with very mixture of different cultures?
Right.
Maybe
I'll try to answer.
Yeah, Tzang, please.
Yeah, I'll try to answer this. Thanks for this question. Well, there are people who are pushing the limits, but they never last beyond like 2 or 3 years or 3 or 4 years. Chris Ho is one person that has lasted over 4 decades. And for 4 decades, he has consistently remained very consistent about his own identity as this multi-hyphenated artist persona And he is often, I think that's one of the reasons why he could last so long, because he always somehow gets away with it.
Yeah, and I think to just add on, I guess Chris Ho's influence too has been a lot on Western music. You know, it's the same case with like Koreans in America. Sorry, Koreans listening to American music, and they're taking the inspiration from more cutting edge, more alternative sounds in the 70s. This is where I think this can be part of a larger Asian narrative, you know, how it interacts with like Western and American pop, how it appropriates, how it actually pushes it further, you know, not just with Brian Eno, but I think in many other artists as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. So anyone else?
Can
yeah.
I ask? I have a small questions. I'm interested in this guy. I've got to know this person for the first time today, but I'm interested in this guy, Chris Hu. Maybe your purpose today is to tell us the legacy of Chris Hu, but if so, please tell me, how can I approach him? How can I approach him, his production or CD, album, or data streaming?
Yes.
Or how can I get to know them in Japan?
Thank you. Tzang, maybe you want to take this?
Sure. You can definitely look for Chris Ho or X across the Ho on Spotify. On Spotify as well as on YouTube. However, it is really hard to find because sometimes the spelling changes and people sometimes misspell it. But I'll be happy to send you some links. But I think for the purpose of everybody, just by typing
I have another question. So, during listening to your speaking, I think of one name in Japanese as ECD. They are of course different, but how do you think who is similar to this Chris Fu in other countries? For example, Chris Fu is like blah 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 blah.
Right.
Can you compare to some person, some musicians or some artists?
I think it is. Maybe Khuin can take this, but right now I'll just quickly say that I think he's a unique product of the Singapore condition, because of the way Singapore is structured and how we have to make things very clean. So that makes him that whole multiple personality thing and getting away. I don't know. I don't know if Khuin has an answer for this.
Okay. Thank you. Arigato. Thank you so much.
But thank you. I think we can take the discussion, but I'm sorry we are running out of time and we have to move to the next speaker. So thank you very much, Tzang, and thanks to all the questions here from Katsushi and Dr. Shin Dongjin as well, who I'm going to introduce now from the lecturer from Yonsei.